Well, we made it to the end. You guys are troopers. We're into the last hour here together. Couple things before I get into our last session. We have an Inspire worship CD that I'd like each of you to take home with you. There's, I think, enough copies for everybody to get one. So just help yourself. There's some on the table, some on the back shelf where the sound guys are at, and a little table back there. Just help yourself to a worship CD. This comes with the Lead Like Jesus song today. To live my life every day. There's a video, you can look it up on YouTube, that's pretty inspiring on how to lead like Jesus. So help yourself to the free worship CDs back there. Some of you are church leaders. Let me just see our pastors real quick. Would you just raise your hands? And I'd like you to give these guys a hand right now. Give these guys a hand. It is very difficult to be a shepherd serving leader in the church today. Very, very difficult. And these men bear so much pain, they bear so much responsibility, and they take so much criticism. Because we've never walked in their shoes. We don't understand what they've all been through. But boy, can we ever easily criticize. So I'd like you to lift up your pastor. Steve nailed something. You know, when George W. Bush was in office, somebody sent me an email, said, we need to pray and fast for our president. So I signed me up. So I prayed and fasted for our president on a monthly basis. And then when President Obama came in, the thing kept right on going. And I said, that's what I'm called to do for President Obama. Whether we agree or disagree with our leaders, we are called to pray, not criticize. Can I say that to a crowd of godly men? Amen? So I've got a book back there if you're interested. It's Lead Like Jesus for Churches. It's a story about a church that's really messed up, going nowhere, that figures out how to lead, love, and serve with a mission to re-engage the mission. That's what that one's about, specifically for those that are involved in church leadership. Lead Like Jesus, the blue book, is kind of the textbook for what I'm talking about. A lot of the concepts, a lot deeper than what I've been plumbing. But if you're interested in something on that, this is kind of the gift version of that, the servant leader. It's got just beautifully laid out. It's a lot shorter, so you can get through it a lot quicker. Same concepts as the blue book. And then Halftime is a book about moving from success to significance. If you're entering the last part of your life, meaning like from 50 onward or 45 onward, except I don't like that because I'm 46. But if you're moving from, you kind of knocked it out of the park in your career, you've got to raise those kids, but now you're looking at significance, the latter part of your life. How do you achieve that? How do you get to where you want to go? Written by Bob Buford, a godly guy, some great stuff about how to achieve a life of significance in the latter half. And then I've got a few more other resources I'll tell you about at the end. But just want to close us out here with thinking about leading like Jesus in the boardroom, in business, in community, in church, and beyond. And I'm just guessing that most of us here are involved in the real world. Is that right? And I think we've done ourselves a disservice to break the church world apart from the business world. I think the two ought to be integrated. Believe that with all my heart. But sometimes we have to be careful how we engage that, because some people have this full-time ministry perspective. You know, people who are missionaries and speakers and preachers and counselors. And folks, we are all involved in full-time ministry. Okay? We are all involved in full-time ministry. Thank you to the local church, to Ryan. Steve, it's been an honor to work with you, to re-engage with you, Leroy, and meet some new folks. And a lot of you I've met before. It's been a joy to be here and to share one of the greatest messages in the world. And I love the story of Jesus, and that we've been looking at him from leadership. There's a lot more we could look at. But I love the story of Jesus because it is so practical. So practical. We can learn to lead, love, and serve like Jesus. Now, here's the problem, though, with Jesus. We've kind of kept him in church world. We need to bring him into our other worlds. Let me share a quick story with you. Y2K, year 2000, there was a huge conference up in Chicago at Willow Creek. Bill Hybels, I don't know if you've heard of this guy. He does these big leadership conferences called the Summit. I wasn't there, but apparently Hybels did something really crazy on Y2K. He had a relationship with the president when he was going through one of his most difficult times, and that was counseling him through the Lewinsky scandal. How many of you remember the Lewinsky scandal? President Clinton. And Hybels was a pastor who was called in to counsel the president. And Hybels said, I've got this big leadership conference. I wonder if I could bring President Clinton into this room full of thousands of pastors and interview him on leadership. So he did. But he didn't tell his team. Yeah, he got in trouble for it. When Mr. President, I'm talking evangelical leaders at the height of the Lewinsky scandal. You talk about sucking the air out of the room when Mr. President walks in. Heibel sits down with him, begins to talk, and says, hey, would you, just talk to us a little bit about leadership? Maybe 10, 15 minutes with the president before security whisked him off the stage. He said, who are your greatest serving leadership, or not serving leadership, he just said, who are your greatest leadership role models? Your president. And that was the key question. But before he went there, he said, now, all these evangelicals, when they see you walk into church on a Sunday morning, Mr. President, they think you're doing that for political show. Would you speak to this group of men about that? Nothing like taking it easy on the president, right in front of several thousand. And Clinton said, well, I've been going to church for the last 30 years. If it's a show, at least it's a consistent show. Great answer. And then Heibels goes on and he says questions like, so tell us about your leadership role models. And of course, Clinton went on to talk about Mahatma Gandhi, serving leader in India. Talked about Martin Luther King Jr. Talked about Kennedy from Massachusetts. He talked about Nelson Mandela down there in South Africa. All these people that had impacted his leadership. Time was up. Off goes Mr. President Clinton. And the next speaker on the stage is a guy by the name of Ken Blanchard, the author of Lead Like Jesus. And Blanchard gets up and he decides to have some fun with the crowd. He says, how many of you think that President Clinton's legacy would have looked different had he named Jesus of Nazareth as his leadership role model? And everybody clapped their hands and said, yes, now we can pick on the president. That's why he's got all these problems. And Blanchard turned right around at the crowd and he said, he's been in church for 30 years and he's never heard it from you guys. We've never seen Jesus as a leadership role model. We've never brought him into the practical part of our lives, in the business or whatever. And I think Blanchard had a good point. We have kind of relegated Jesus only to certain subjects and certain topics when really Jesus should integrate with everything in life. I want to get us a working definition of serving leadership. If you've got your notes, you want to pull those out. We're on page, I have no idea. I think it's page 3, but it might be page 2. A serving leadership definition. I believe that a serving leader is someone worth following who accomplishes a higher purpose by developing others. Jesus said, greater works you will do when I go back to the Father. Raising up and developing other leaders. John Maxwell tells a great story in his book, The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, about Coca-Cola Corporation. And Coca-Cola was started back in the 70s, I believe, by a guy by the name of Bob Woodruff. And then it was led for about 17 years by a guy by the name of Robert Wazeta. In fact, Wazeta was an amazing CEO. He took this company to an incredible global presence. He built this company, did an amazing job. Well, what's interesting about Wazeta, back in 1997, he was diagnosed with cancer, and in 6 weeks later, he was gone. Now, you would think that Coca-Cola would take a major hit in its stock, but it didn't. Because Wazeta had been doing something for a man by the name of Doug Iverson that Woodruff had done for him back in the 70s. He had been developing him. He had been grooming him, coaching him, training him to take over the company. Wazeta had no idea that he was going to come down with cancer, but he had been preparing somebody to take his place when that moment came. And when the moment came, Iverson stepped in, and the company went on. In fact, stock barely hiccuped for Coca-Cola. You see, he did exactly what Woodruff had done for him, set him up for success. You and I are not successful leaders unless we raise up successors. So many people in their leadership, they're about making a name for themselves, and when they pass off the scene, the church crashes and crumbles. The organization crashes and crumbles. But Jesus taught us, greater works you will do when I go back to the Father. Jesus was all about developing others. Now, we get this in parenting. We get this in developing our children. But what about business? Are you setting people up who work in your company to be successful, who might even outstrip your success? A good friend of mine ran a large company in Holmes County, Ohio. He's now no longer the CEO, but I remember going into his office, and he had hundreds of people work for him, and the guy was a pastor. He was an amazing business guy as well. But here's what's really cool about my friend Bill. He said, Luke, I'm not the smartest cookie around here, but I know how to hire smarter people than me. And then let them run with it. He would bring in key people and give them everything they needed to make them successful. And you know what's interesting is we always sometimes think that if I raise somebody, develop somebody, they might take my job away. They might become my greatest competitor. Actually, the opposite is true. When you and I pour into somebody, They're always going to give back if it was genuinely done for you. Only secure leaders can develop successors. So if you are very, very uncomfortable with developing somebody, helping them go to the next level beyond you, you're an insecure leader. You don't know who you are, whose you are. In business, we have to understand success is based on the mission and the purpose going on, not whether or not I rise or fall in people's estimation. And it's true in the church world as well. I'm a successful father if my kids carry on my legacy. Are you with me? It's the same in all other spheres. Serving leadership is about the mission. It's about the kingdom. Jesus was here to establish His Father's kingdom. You heard me say this last night. It's not until after the resurrection that we see ourselves worshiping Jesus. Prior to that, He's modeling. It's all about my Father and my Father's will. You're not successful unless you raise up a successor. A serving leader is someone worth following who accomplishes a higher purpose by developing others. Winston Churchill captured this definition when he said, "We make a living by what we get. We make a life by what we give." I used to share this quote with another slide of Churchill, and I had people complain. They said, "That's not Churchill. He doesn't have the cigar." So I went out and got the cigar. If that offends anyone here, I changed it because I had to have him with a cigar, all right? Because Churchill was kind of known for that, right? He said, "We make a life by what we give. We make a living by what we get." He gets the definition of serving leadership. Let's talk briefly now about the two roles of serving leadership. I said last night, some people have this idea that it's about letting the inmates run the prison. Just let people do whatever they want to do. That's not serving leadership. There's a stewarding role and there's a shepherding role. This comic depicts a problem that we have way too often in our leadership, where the leader says, "I want to change, but I want all of you to change." Very top down, doesn't live out the values. This does not capture at all what we're talking about. He's neither shepherding nor stewarding in his leadership. The first role is a shepherding role, which is very top down, casting a vision from the top. See, a shepherding leader, I don't know how much you're aware of shepherds in the old world. Like our world here in Lancaster, we've got green pastures. But green pastures in the old world is like leading your sheep through the desert, helping them find one little tuft of grass here, another one over here, another one over there. The shepherd goes out front. He gives them their daily bread. And at night they go to this stone enclosure that has no door. The shepherd protects his sheep by getting them into the sheepfold, and then he lays down across the doorway. He is the door to the sheep. This is why Jesus said that. In fact, I don't know if the statement, "not over my dead body," comes from the dirt. But the shepherd would protect his sheep. He would lay down his life for the sheep. He would lead them to what they needed. He would cast vision and direction from the top. A serving leader has a compelling vision. You guys know how to fish for fish. I'm going to show you how to fish for people. Jesus had a compelling vision. They dropped everything to follow someone worth following with a vision. And I have to ask every one of us, are you somebody worth following? Secondly, do you have a vision? Where there is no vision, people stumble all over themselves because they can't see what God is doing, one version says. We know the one where there is no vision, people perish. What that means is they stumble all over themselves because they can't see what God is doing. You and I are vision casters as leaders. We need to have a compelling vision. We lead that from the top. The traditional pyramid stands. It's very top down when it comes to casting vision. And then people can choose whether or not they want to follow that vision. If our vision is according to truth, if it's top down, it's worth following, they can commit themselves, and then they are responsible to the leader. They make a choice to support it. So as shepherds, serving leaders give their people vision and direction to accomplish the mission. They are responsible for casting a compelling vision that inspires others to follow. The second role, though, is stewardship. You and I have been given a certain amount of time to steward the resources that God has given us, including people. We are stewards of those people. And what do we mean by stewarding? The traditional pyramid is now flipped. People are now responsible to accomplish the mission, and we are responsive to their needs. Followers are empowered and resourced by the leader to carry out the mission. Probably the best way for me to explain this is by telling you a story. The Ritz-Carlton is one of those classy world establishments of hotel service that kind of goes beyond the Best Western and the local Holiday Inn. Now, I've never stayed at a Ritz. I'm told it's pretty amazing. But one thing about the Ritz Hotel is their training, their empowerment program. They have learned how to flip the pyramid. They've learned how to empower their people. One of the great stories from the Ritz has to do with one of their Atlanta properties. And Schultze, I'm trying to think of his first name. Howard Schultz was the CEO of the Ritz-Carlton for a while. He understood this, a German guy. He understood that you had to empower your people. They take their people through a 6-week process, teaching them how the Ritz works, what the values of the Ritz are. Like their mission statement is, we are ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen. And they empower their people that at the end of the 6-week training, they give everybody in their company, including the janitor, $2,000 of discretionary money. What that means is $2,000 that they can make any decision with, not for themselves, but to solve any kind of problem at the Ritz. That's a lot of money. $2,000. I don't have to check with my manager. I can solve any kind of customer-related problem with $2,000. That's how much they believe in their people. They train them, and then they empower them. They give them, they resource them. And so Howard was walking through one of their Atlanta properties one time, and he knew people by name, including the janitors. As he was walking through the hotel, he said, "Where's Mary today?" "Mary? Well, she's off in Honolulu, Hawaii." "What's she doing in Honolulu?" He missed Mary that day as he was walking through. They said, "Well, there was this gentleman that was here the other day, and he was going to the airport and forgot that he had not put his laptop in his suitcase. He's trying to change his flights. He's trying to get back at his laptop. He's flying to Honolulu where he's going to give a major speech to his corporation the next day. And he called back to the hotel, said, "You've got to have housekeeping. Go get this computer out of this room. Give it to Federal Express. They got to guarantee overnight delivery." Well, Mary, you see, didn't trust Federal Express. She went down and bought a ticket, flew the computer to Hawaii herself, gave it to the gentleman to make sure he got it in time, and then flew back in the next flight. She didn't stay there to enjoy the surf. Now, did they make any money on that transaction? What do you think? Possibly. You know, Ken Blanchard picked up on that story. I tell that story. The Ritz has become well known for its service culture. Free marketing, you could call it. You bet they made a lot of money on that transaction. Now, in the moment, no. But they learned this idea of empowerment. How much do you and I believe in the people that we are training to the point that we allow them to make mistakes? Remember the IBM story from this morning. So a good leader empowers his people from the bottom up in the flipped traditional model. They support their people as they implement the mission. There's nothing more frustrating for me when I walk into a business and somebody can't help me. You with me? And you can tell that they're just a crony for their boss, right? You run into this with a lot of used car salesmen. "Well, I don't know if I can give you that deal or not. Let me go check with my manager." They go back to the room. There's no manager back there. They just kind of fiddle around a little bit, then come back out and say, "Yeah, whatever. Sorry, I just stole the used car salesman's strategy." Or actually exposed it. Let's look at our framework for serving leadership. Be, know, and do. We've been kind of dancing around this throughout the last 2 days. But it's all about being, the heart, first of all. Then it's the right knowing, and then finally the doing. This has everything to do with who we are, our being. God created human beings before He created human doings, okay? So we've got to start with the heart. We've got to start with the intentions, the motivations of our heart. And the second part is the knowing, what goes on in our heads. What's our vision? What do we believe? What are our convictions? And what do we do with our influence? That is the knowing part. Finally, the doing is the hand, and that refers to our methods, our behaviors as a leader. And we tie these all together with a number of disciplines that we looked at briefly this morning. Now, in their book, Touch Points, Doug Conant and Mehdi Norgard talk about the importance of having those three aligned. We've got a lot of people that might lead from the heart, but not from the head and the hands. That's the problem, they say. Let me show you the importance of having all three correctly aligned. If you only have the right beliefs about leadership and influence, and you have the correct methods, that means you don't have the heart. You've got the other two aligned, but not the heart. You are going to have an inauthentic leadership. And I think I heard somebody talk about that last night. Maybe Leroy, you talked about inauthentic leaders. You have to get the heart there. You have to have all three aligned. If you only have the right intentions and motivations, you've only got the right heart of leadership or the right behaviors of leadership, it's not an inauthentic leadership, but it is an illogical leadership. Have you ever met illogical leaders? They don't really make sense. They haven't thought through stuff. No one likes to follow. It's frustrating when people are illogical. Again, all three need to be aligned. And then finally, if you get everything right, but you don't get the behaviors, you are considered an incompetent leader. So you've got to be a leader that has all three, the be, the know, and the do. They all need to be present in our leadership. Robert S. McGee once pointed out that if Satan had a formula for self-worth, it would be when my performance plus the opinion of others equals my self-worth. It's not God's formula, it's Satan's formula. In just a moment, we're going to break up into small groups here. We're going to do an exercise. Because this is a really key part of leadership, that we understand that a lot of us base our self-worth on this horrible definition. What people think of me, my performance, how well I perform. And it's really Satan's formula. Our self-worth should never be based on this. But how often do we base our decisions on what people will think of us? On what people will think of us? Do we really want to be defined by the sum total of how well we perform and what people think of us? Is that really God's definition? It leads us to a key question. Who are we trying to please with our leadership? Who are we trying to please? We can serve either an audience of one, or we can serve people. And I know that sounds kind of strange. I've been telling you we need to be serving. But ultimately, who are we serving? And I would contend that if we're not ultimately serving God, if we're not living according to the kingdom, the truth principle, we really don't end up serving people. We end up serving self. We manipulate. We take advantage of people. God is my audience of one. When I lay my head on the pillow at night, I have to ask myself, not did I tick some people off today, but did I honor you, God? Did I say what you wanted me to say, or did I just tickle people's ears? Did I just make people feel good with that message? Or did I honor you? Did I lead according to my audience of one? Now, unfortunately, some people excuse arrogance based on this point. Well, God told me this. That can be very dangerous, can't it? Who is our primary audience? We have two choices, folks. Look at your diagram. When people are our audience, we lead from either pride, which leads to self-promotion and self-exaltation. When we lead from pride, we self-promote, we self-exalt. Or we lead from fear. And this is where a lot of people have insecurity, and they begin to self-protect. Pride and fear break down into self-exaltation or self-protection. We end up doing crazy things that either promote self or protect self. When we don't lead with the right audience in mind, we start doing crazy things. We do things that will please people but not please God. Leadership is no longer based on doing what is right, but on what will ultimately serve us. And we become focused inward again, in curvatus in se. When we lead to please God as our audience of one, something else happens. We recognize, first of all, that we are simply stewards of the time and the gifts that He's given us. And with that comes a responsibility to do what is right to those within our sphere of influence. We're stewarding in the world around us. We lead from a foundation of humility, because we realize there's nothing within us. It's everything about Him, our audience, something greater than us. And this causes us to look outside of ourselves and celebrate all that is right and good, regardless of what role we played in it. We lead with humility and we lead with courage when God is our audience of one. I already mentioned Jim Collins in his book, Good to Great. One who blends extreme personal humility is what Collins, a secular guy, says about leadership. And I think I've got a couple copies under the table back there if you're interested. This is one of those business books that really changed a lot of my thinking, and it was a secular book. It's amazing sometimes to me how some of these secular guys get truth more than we do. He's talking about a level 5 leader who blends extreme personal humility with intense professional will. Jesus was focused, fixed on Jerusalem. Nothing would dissuade him and get him off course. And he had this tremendous humility. Great leaders look out the window at their team when something good happens, giving them the credit rather than looking in the mirror to pat themselves on the back. They do look in the mirror, however, to accept responsibility when things don't go as planned. And conversely, not so great leaders, and we've all known these, are the ones that look in the mirror to self-congratulate when everything is going right. And they only look out the window to blame their team when things are not going right. The second result of leading at a higher level when we choose God as our audience of one is this idea of courage. Courageous leaders. I love that story of Caleb where he says, give me this mountain. Remember that? He's like 80 years of age. And he's like, let's go out and take those mountain people, right? And Caleb is a man of courage. He knows that God has called him and equipped him. In our Mennonite world, we have this problem with, we call it humility, but it's actually false humility. Can I just be kind enough to share with you that this idea, and in the Amish world, Gelassenheit, I believe, is the term that they use to describe this intense sense of humility. That there's a good part of humility, but there's a negative side where I say, well, I'm a nobody. I can't do anything. No, and I love what Steve said. God has called us to lead. God has called us to step forth. Every one of us has been given gifts. There's this incredible parable of the talents. And the one guy takes 2 and he turns them into 4. One guy takes 5, turns them into 10. And the guy with 1 goes out and buries it, right? That's false humility. When you stomp yourself down, when you say, no, I can't do that. No, I'm not gifted. No, I can't take that Sunday school class. No, I can't lead that effort. You are stomping down the grace and the call and the courage that God has called you to flow into. Are you with me? So do not ever let yourself bow to false humility. Folks, it's not humility. It's actually a form of pride. God has equipped us for the work at hand. He has called us to step forth as courageous men, empowered us to carry out a mission. On the other hand, leading with self for people, as our audience, we end up with the negative outcomes of pride and fear. And that always causes us to separate ourselves from another. Pride and fear separate, folks. But humility and courage bring us together. We begin to distort and twist the truth about reality. We end up with a very temporal focus instead of an eternal one. But leading with humility and confidence brings us together. It creates community. We get this sense of contentment. There's generosity. Everything is based on an eternal perspective. It's at this point that we typically break up into circles of about 25 or 30 people. But for the sake of time today, we're going to do it right at your place. I had 8 guys here that were going to lead these groups, but we just don't have the time for it. So what we're going to do right now is I want you at your benches. I want you to get into groups of 5 or 6 people, maybe 7. We're just going to bust the benches right down the middle. And then there's 2 benches that are going to work with each other. Does that make sense? You're going to kind of turn around and turn to each other. Just kind of bust yourselves down through the middle here, kind of separate off, and get into groups of 5 or 6 people. All right? The people in the one bench are leaning forward. The one bench is leaning back. Get into your groups, 5 or 6 people, maybe 4, and then I'll give you your instructions. Kind of flesh this out, how to process this at a deeper level. This is one of the ways to do it. And I obviously didn't give you enough time because we don't have enough time. So I put together a resource with all this material. It took me 3 hours, 4 hours to talk about this. I've kind of condensed it into 1.5 hours, 1 hour, I can't remember how much time it is, of video along with a bunch of worksheets, about 10 worksheets. And I realized we can't read them. So, but all on this resource that I'll tell you about in a little while, where I take each page of the notes that you've got and flesh it out, where you can work through it with a small group, with other men, and begin to process stuff at a deeper level along with the videos. So just wanted to let you know about that resource and how you can get a hold of it at the end of our time together. All right, I want to summarize this thing about fear and pride. How many of you had fun with that, by the way? Some of you maybe had too much fun with it, right? Okay. How many of you got nervous? Most? Okay, all right. I remember sometimes we've done this with a group when we get into bigger groups with 30 people. One person will say, well, I'm afraid of what everybody's thinking of me right now. Yeah. And how many of you saw fear as the greater motivator than pride? How many of your groups saw that? Yeah. Typically, fear seems to come up as the greater motivator. A lot of us tend to lead out of fear. Blanchard and Hodges use this word ego as an acronym. Ego, as we always know, is kind of a negative thing. Now, we're not going Freudian on you here. What we're suggesting, according to Hodges and Blanchard, is that it is an acronym for edging God out of the equation of our relationships. We edge God out. We become focused inwardly. That's what pride and fear do. We edge Him out. When we describe what we end up ultimately with our leadership is God is edged out when we focus on leading to please people, or when we lead to power over people. Fear and pride are always edging God out. That's the acronym. Now, you would think that that's a horribly negative thing to end on. Well, the positive part of this is that there's actually a positive ego as well, believe it or not. There's not just a negative ego of edging God out, but we can actually also have a positive one where we exalt God only in our leadership. EGO, exalt God only. We either choose to edge Him out or we exalt Him through courage and fulfilling through humility His power working through us to fulfill His mission. That's when we exalt God only in our leadership. Okay? So that's the replacement for pride and fear. This idea of courage. This idea of humility, looking out the window. And that brings us together in community. So edging God out or exalting God only, those are the two paradigms that we have to embrace. Final page, the fourth page, the second to last page. The knowing of serving leadership. The knowing of serving leadership. What we believe in our heads about leadership, people, and work will determine how we lead. And the chart in your notes kind of contrasts God's perspective with the world's view on leadership, people, and work. We've already learned that Jesus' perspective is that it's all about serving others. He gets down and He washes their feet. Sometimes at these events we pass out napkins. And I don't know, Ryan, where are you back there, Ryan, somewhere? Is there anybody from the church here? I forgot to do this. If it's possible, I would love for you to go downstairs and get a bunch of napkins from the kitchen if you got them. One per person. And this is how we're going to end the event today. If we don't have napkins for everybody, or paper towels, or whatever we can scrounge up, the way I want you to end when you leave this place is I want you to find one or two, maybe three brothers that have meant something to you, have served you, have led you, or somebody that just needs to be prayed over and encouraged. I want you to find two or three people before you leave. And I want you to get down. This is not reciprocal. We're not getting out buckets of water. But I want you to get down on your knees, and I want you to take that napkin, and I want you to wipe their feet down. And while you wipe their feet, I want you to pray a prayer of blessing over them. I want you to bless them as a serving leader in their home, in their family, in their church, in their community. That's how I want us to end the event today. After Ryan comes up, dismisses us, after that, you will get a chance, an opportunity to find two or three brothers, or maybe just one, and go to that person and wipe their feet and bless them. So we're good with the napkins? All right, if you would start handing those out, please. And that's the way we're going to end at the very end. You all got that? This is the way to practice the serving leadership model of Jesus. I was with a pastor and his wife one time, and we were talking about serving leadership, and she said, you know the way that I wash the people at my church's feet? Now, I get it. We do this thing at communion where we actually pull out the buckets of water. That's pretty cool. I'm not diminishing that at all. But I think we need to find practical ways to do it. You know what she said she does? When the gal at her church, and there's lots of gals at your church as well, when they get 9 months pregnant, she goes over to their house, maybe even at 8 months, and she cleans their toilets. She makes meals. She sweeps the floor. She says, that's how I serve and wash their feet. There's a lot of different ways that we can do it, but I thought that pastor's wife got it. She doesn't have to do that. She could form a committee, because we Mennonites are great at forming committees for stuff like that. But a pastor's wife goes out and washes her people's feet. Jesus washed feet, and I'm sure it was a lesson they never forgot. The key leadership text, Matthew 20, Jesus called them together and said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them. Their high officials exercise authority over them, but not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. Whoever wants to be first must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. You see, in contrast, the world's perspective on leadership is all about the big man, the guy with the power and the authority. Throughout history, it's been pretty clear that Leadership is all about exercising positional authority and power over followers. But Jesus comes into this world and says, not so with you. He destroys death by dying. He destroys the structures of this world through His serving leadership model. Let me share something with you that might blow your circuits. I was at a school up in Guy's Mills called Faith Builders a number of years ago, and my good friend Steve was my prof, and he said, Luke, that passage in Peter that says that the elements will burn with fervent heat. Do you know which one I'm talking about? I always pictured that as the flames of hell burning up this earth and everything, and it could be. But he said that word in the Greek, that elements, is the Greek word stoika, which could actually refer to the systems of power and leadership in our world. Don't you think that when Jesus comes and establishes His kingdom, whether, I don't know if you're pan, or what you are, but when He establishes His kingdom, His leadership, He's going to burn up the systems of power and authority and replace it with a system that is completely focused outside of ourselves. Oh Lord, hasten the day when even our governments, if there's going to be governments in the New Jerusalem, I think there is. I think it's going to be the everlasting. I think Isaiah kind of introduces us to that idea. But it's not about the big man in charge. It's a serving leadership model. When we talk about people, we know that God's perspective is that they are to be loved, valued, enjoyed for who they are, like a father with his son. Because everybody's been made in the image of God and has intrinsic value. Not for what they do for you and I, but because they're made in the image of God, and that makes them of immeasurable worth. And so at our church, we have a young man who is mentally challenged. But Josiah brings a beauty to our culture at our church, and we honor Josiah. You know, in the old days, we used to hide those people away from society. I want to tell you something. Those are some of the greatest gifts we have in society today. Not those who are just mentally challenged, but other challenges. We need to honor. We need to call out and serve the least of these. In fact, true serving leaders use their power for those who have no power. True serving leaders use their voice to help those who are voiceless. That's serving leadership, because everyone's made in the image of God. In contrast, the world sees people primarily in terms of their usefulness. How can they be controlled in order to accomplish certain aims? Love and concern is secondary to the primary objective of obtaining the bottom line through those people that work for me. The biblical perspective on work is that it's all about glorifying God. Writing to the Colossians, the Apostle Paul states, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not as for human masters. You see, work is a good thing. So I have a problem in the business world when people have this idea, I hate Mondays, or thank God it's Friday. That's a problem. We ought to be just as excited going to work on Monday morning as we are excited leaving work on Friday night. If we are working as unto the Lord, if our work is our full-time ministry. Amen? So clock watchers get saved. None of us should be characterized by TGIF or I hate Mondays. This reflects the world's opinion of work, that it's a necessary evil. But God actually created us to work in the garden. The only curse were the thorns and the thistles brought on by our self-inflicted, self-centered perspective. That's the world's opinion. That work is all about just earning a wage and making me look good in the process. But work is an act of worship. It's an act of worship. When I make a really beautiful chair, when I wash the dishes, when I change diapers, when I do anything, I do it as unto the Lord for His glory. I build that to perfection. I build that with expertise. I'm a master craftsman made in the master craftsman's image to produce quality and excellence to make the world a better place. Whether we're pouring walls of concrete, whether we're preaching the gospel, we do it all as unto Him for His glory. That's work. Rick Warren goes so far as to say, if your heart's not in your work, you are in the wrong job. If you're not working with all your heart, you are sinning. That's powerful. Final part of beginning the journey, I've got about 3 minutes to wrap this up. The doing part of serving leadership. What do serving leaders do? It's a great question. That's going to be up to you, folks, as you leave this place. What do you do with serving leadership? How will you serve your spouse, your kids, the folks at your church? How will you serve? That depends whether or not your heart, your mind, and your actions are aligned according to the model of Jesus Christ of Nazareth. I'm just going to skip through this very quickly because we are out of time. Would you bow your heads for prayer? Father, we're so grateful that you have called us out of darkness into your marvelous light. We thank you, Lord God, that you who began a good work in us, that you will perform and complete it in the day of Christ Jesus. We thank you, Lord God, that we stand on the brink of the rest of the days of our lives, that you've given us an opportunity to serve the world around us, to bring light and life and life to those in a dark world. Father, we pray that you would anoint us now as we go forward from here to serve one another in love, to make you famous to everyone we meet. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. If you're interested in that resource, it also comes with a bonus session called The Art of Listening, another video. I actually offer those at half price today for $50 if you're interested. I can do credit cards, checks. You can even just pick it up and send it in the mail if you want to do that, or take it for free. And my dog will just starve for a week, and that's okay. He's fat anyhow. So it's been a joy being here with you. I do speak in the church world. I speak in the business world. I do some coaching on the side. I'd love to engage with more of you in the future. You can also sign up for my newsletter if you're interested. My last slide here, send a text message, sub SLI to 33444 if you want to be on my email list. I send out a couple emails every week. Love to stay in touch. Again, don't forget to pick up your worship CD on the way out. Okay, there's a free CD for all of you. And we will meet again. Okay, so here's my final words. I want to propose, because we're Mennonites, right? Most of us here are from a Mennonite background. We love this thing called reunions. Anybody love reunions? Yeah, okay, some of us don't like reunions. All right, but I want you to come to this reunion. In 1,000,000 years from now, and I'm serious about this,